Alright, so in this video, I want to go over 5 things that over the course of the past 4 streams that I've done so far, and usually averaging about like 300 viewers, I've had a lot of people ask me questions about these 5 things, or just seemingly being unaware. So if you know them, that's great. I'm not insulting your intelligence. I am just going over these 5 things because these are really 5 things that I think people aren't doing well or not doing at all, okay? So I think that this is something very important to really understand, and it's gonna help you do more damage, okay? It's not revolutionary things, but listen, if people are asking me it, I must have to make a video on it, right? And if you don't even know one of these, then I'm counting that as a colossal W. Even one thing to help you do more damage, we take it. Alright, so the first thing is that buffs stack, okay? Buffs do actually stack. So the problem that a lot of people run into is that they really don't think that these buffs stack, so that they end up playing differently than they should, right? In this case, going for the skill 2 is really not going to hurt anyone, right? So the problem is that people are like, oh, okay, well, it's going to be a buff, right? And then it's going to last 4 turns and then I could reapply it. But no, you could reapply the buffs multiple times. Same like Monami. It's 4 turns, you couldn't. Then for Nobaras, you could also technically do it multiple times. But then the really main problem is with Gojo's, right? Because this one, technically, the main way to you like really play it is you skill 1, then you skill 3 to be able to, like, for example, like this. So like, I'm going to show you. So you're going to be able to skill 1. And then after this, it's going to give so much energy, right? You're going to get enough to where I do 2 more skill 3s usually, and I'll be able to get my ult, right? Which is going to be perfect. And you'll see here, we'll check all the buffs afterwards that we have. But now we use the skill 3, and then you'll see we'll have 4 cursed energies, right? Sorry, 2 cursed energies and 2 techniques, essentially, right? So if we go here, there's physical, cursed, and then physical, cursed. Same buff, right? 3 turns, 2 turns. So it just, obviously the turns go down, but the buffs are still there. The buffs are going to still be there, right? So there's 2 turns left, which is going to let me perfectly align it. We're going to put damage reduction first of all. And then we'll put nails, doesn't really matter. Then we can buff again. So we're going to have pretty much all the buffs we need to for the ult. And then probably going to be able to do quite good damage with that ult. I'd say so. We're going to do the ult, but I just look. So now look, we have the 1 turn. We have 2 turns. Then we have 1 for 3 turns. And now we're going to have another set, alright, on both of them. And I mean, sure, we could do this, I guess. Or we'll use this. And then here... And I mean, you're gonna see pretty much max damage you could get from this single target. So, you know, it's gonna be good, right? I mean, it should be good damage, right? Hopefully. 700k, I mean, that's like probably one of the highest I've gotten so far with Gojo. So yeah, I mean, when you're able to stack it properly, like we saw, we had so many instances of the buffs, and you really don't want to lose out on that, because that could be like a 50% damage loss. It really is a small thing, right? It really is. But it does so much when you really think about it that, you know, you really got to make sure you think about your buffs correctly to really get the maximum output. Like, genuinely, sometimes I would need to, especially for this boss, like trying to maximize the damage on this boss especially, to be able to go from like hard to very hard to hopefully soon special. In a couple days, I feel like easily I'll get the special. I just got to get Nobara a bit stronger, probably time some stuff better. But it's really that timing that I feel is very important with this. And, you know, you really got to get used to it. You got to get used to it. You got to understand the buffs. And one of the parts is they stack, okay? Like, it's so stupid that it's so important, but it really is. It really is. Now, next up, I actually got some people too asking me, like, what do I use on which person, right? And it's very simple. There's a couple ways you could kind of go about this. First of all, you got to see what unit, like what stats the unit has. For example, Gojo, his main thing, okay, he gives himself damage, right? But then his 2 main abilities that you'll see is this one, right? And then the curse technique, right? The ultimate, right? Which is also curse the technique damage, right? So if you see the ult has been, well, is 1 stat, and then there's also another stat for cursed, then it's probably gonna be better for you to focus on that stat. Now, another way to look at it is, like, for example, for Gojo specifically, this works. Gojo's recollection bit, which, bro, I don't even talk to me, bro. 5 times I've gotten this, insane. Gives him curse technique. So in Gojo's case, it's kind of logical that you should be giving him curse technique, alright? That's something very important. Jujutsu damage just works better on this guy, okay? So this is something very important, right? You kind of want to look at that and kind of see. Now, another way to kind of look at it is that, yeah, the skill 1 does more than this one. So if you're going to have to prioritize one, you should be going for this one, right? If it's doing base damage. So all this to say is that this is the curse technique that you're going to want for Gojo, right? A curse technique, or sorry, a recollection bit, not curse technique, a recollection bit that has curse technique increase for himself, right? For DPSs, that's basically how it's going to work, all right? For example, everyone with this specific logo is going to be curse technique. So you see this one's curse technique, all right, same logo, and there you go. So it's basically dependent on the logos for the buff, right? And then we could continue, and then we've also got further down, well, that's all taijutsu, and then we got curse technique again. So like that's basically how it works. And then besides that, one that's universal, okay, one that's universal, or well, not one, but like a type that's universal is the one where it's a sword. Okay, when it's a sword, it's a damage increase. So whenever you see damage increase, it means any DPS could take it, all right? That's essentially how it's working. If I could find one kind of like this, right, that's a damage increase. And then I have one up here that should also be a damage increase. This one, nope, this one is a damage increase for 70%. So all this to say, you got to see which stat your DPS especially is taking and choose the correct one of taijutsu to jujutsu. Okay. Now, usually it's pretty simple. Itadori, taijutsu, well, physical technique, physical technique, physical technique. All right, pretty simple. Okay, Nobara, cursed, cursed. She gives herself curse damage, so I wonder what you're going to be building on her for the recollection bit and then cursed, right? So that's essentially how it's going to work for DPSs. Now for supports, it's going to be basically filling in the gaps, but usually for supports, you're going to want to stay around certain types. The best one in the game for me, in my opinion, is this one. It gives alt gauge rate really good, and then when you get it to Limit Breaker 1, it's going to be also increasing alt gauge for 200 for self, when enemies are in break or when they're put in break, right? So it's going to be good to get ult quicker. And then there's all the other ones like this, damage reduction and then giving cursed energy at the beginning of the battle, right? So stuff like this, right? Something that gives either damage reduction, damage increase for the whole team, one or the other, right? For example, this gives damage increase for the whole team of 35% for one turn, one time, or like any type of alt increase, right? So like this one, right? So looking for a supportive thing like this is gonna be the best for supporters, right? But knowing which one to put on which unit, especially for DPSs, is important. You got to check to see which stat the skills are based off of, mainly, especially the alt and build off of that. Okay, that one is pretty important. So I'm still going to use this part, but this is also going to be relevant very much in the future. But basically, you kind of got to understand a bit of like what crits and black flashes do. This isn't exactly something you can really modify, but in some cases like Nanamis and others, it will technically be something to kind of like work towards, because when you're able to land both, it is actually more impactful than you think. And this is going to be for only certain units, right? It's not going to be for like a bunch of units, but it will impact certain units. So for example, crits, okay, crits are very similar to normal crits, all right? Crits will be doing, when you get a critical hit, 1.5 times the normal amount. Very simple, okay? Now then, black flashes, okay, which look like this. First of all, they look like this, all right? They go crazy on the screen, right? It's also going to be doing 1.5 times the original damage, same as crits. Now, what they also do is fill the alt gauge, all right, more than just a normal skill. So that's also going to be very, very good. Now, why this is kind of important is because you might be like, crit's not really that good if it's 1.5 times. But then you look at someone like Itadori, and his alt guarantees a black flash. So why is that good? Because his skill 2 gives him crit rate and black flash gauge rate increase, but not that crazy because he gets the guaranteed on the alt. But the crit rate increase, why is it crazy? Because if you get a 1.5 times a 1.5, that becomes multiplicative. And that is when you're going to start doing damage. So you really cannot sleep on crits when black flashes are guaranteed, because that could multiplicatively like increase this, right? So that's 650. So technically about like 1950, right? 1950 times 1.5, right? So technically about like 3,000 times 1.5, that goes up to 4,500, right? If you get both crit and Black Flash. So that's something that you gotta really think about and why it's so important, right? Especially future units, for example, do Black Flashes on, especially Nanami, right? Nanami is one unit they love giving Black Flash to. I think it's this one. So for example, when Black Flash is performed, increase own Black Flash rate, which is going to increase obviously the amount of crits, quote unquote, that you do. And then here he increases his crit rate. And then, no, it's the other Nanami. It's the other Nanami. Whoops, my bad. So it's this Nanami, right? So same thing with the Black Flash thingy. But then here, he's going to be able to do guaranteed Black Flash, right? So you're going to want to be able to crit with him by either giving him other supports or lowering crit res to try and get both Black Flash and also the crit, just so you're able to really go crazy, right? Crazy with both of them together, right? It's something that I think is going to work pretty well for certain units. It's a very niche tip, but it's also something that does ring true for those specific units. Now, this one's a little silly, I'm not gonna lie, but it's something that's actually very true, okay? And I just need to know, like, how many of you down below don't really take advantage of this, right? So what is it? Basically, it's getting your ult quicker by killing the enemies, all right? This one is actually going to be very good for Gojo, and something that I think you're going to have to make advantage of with Gojo specifically, because it's going to help him get ults twice in a battle, okay? So sometimes, especially now that I talked about the buffs, you might be wanting to continue to buff him. But let's say especially if you have this, which increases the ult fill gauge rate, well, what you're going to also want to do is try and just one tap. I don't know if Gojo is going to be able to get it, but you'll see that when Gojo kills, he's also going to increase his... it does not kill. Okay, let me go to an easier floor to actually just see it easily. Well, yeah. Okay, so I'm going into 5. I'm above the power, so I think we're chilling. We should be. Anyway, he's not type disadvantage now, and it's lower power, so... if we don't kill, then Gojo might just be a fraud. He might. So, basically, for this, right? This is to try and force ult in a way, and it could work, right? It could easily work sometimes. We're just gonna tap. We'll put this on. We'll tap and put that on, and then we'll be able to put that. So we're gonna get the ult gauge increase. We're gonna get the damage increase. We're gonna do some damage and buff, right? So then you see, just in one skill, he goes all the way up to there, right? Which is basically going to guarantee, even if you don't have this, right, in 2 turns, you could essentially just, we'll retry without it too. You could essentially just, like, get your ult for the second turn, like, guaranteed by turn 3, right? And especially with this, it plays so well, because you're just going to be able to sometimes get, Gojo's going to be able to get his ult twice in one, before he leaves, twice in one battle, because obviously sometimes it is very hard to get the ult twice, but when there's multiple units like this, it makes it much easier, right? So that's a free kill. Alright, perfect. Now he has 4 turns, right? Technically he has 3 turns to get it, but the way to go about this, like I just said, especially to make him do the damage, is to really focus the mini-mobs, right? By focusing the mini-mobs, we're in a relative position to what we were before, but in a very different way. And now look, one just like that, immediately. And yeah, so to be fair, the big mob died. I didn't think Nobara would do that much, but you'll see, like, for actual hard bosses, it could be a way, right, to cheese it, right? Because basically, instead of just targeting and not getting ult on the big boss, what you could do is target the mobs on the side to get your ult. And then technically, it's going to make you do more damage by the end, especially if you have something like this, where it's going to increase your damage by 85% when it's at, well, I guess 80% on ult, right? So that is something very important. Just make sure you try to kill the mobs to increase your ult gauge for your DPSs especially. Now then, I will admit this one is going to be especially for the future, because mono teams become way more relevant in Tower. Okay, Tower makes it so that mono teams are essentially a necessity in the future in a lot of stages, or are just better, alright? So for example, an example is mono green. So how a mono green team could look is you have Nobara, you have Megumi, you have Gojo, and then for a debuffer, like if you want like anything else, right? Like it could be any color technically for a debuffer. Oh, Ghetto, sorry, Ghetto. So with that, you're gonna start like stacking up debuffs, and then like you're gonna be able to do a lot more damage with Nobara. But having these mono teams is gonna be good for type advantage, and whenever you can make use of it, you do. Now then, a lot of people that I've heard were stuck at chapter 812, and this is something with time you'll be able to overcome by just getting stronger, getting more HP, leveling up, right? But one thing that also rings true is that when you're able to and have the type advantage, try to go as mono as you can, especially when you consider like if it's a good DPS that could work in a lot of things. For example, in chapter, oh, I keep on doing that. In chapter 9, a lot of the stages are type like disadvantage to green. So you're type advantage with green. And due to that, one unit that I started building was Mechamaru, because he's actually very good for stuff like this and has AoEs and is very good to just completely nuke one stage with his ult. And it's going to help, right? So if you're able to build the type advantages, it will benefit you. Now, even for yellow, like sure, you could technically build Saki because she can work decently well. She is not anything crazy though, to be honest. But from what I know, like she can work okay enough. But like you would probably be better just staying with Gojo and building until he can't. But when there is the type advantage, try to go full in on that type advantage, especially for green. It's a very strong one right now with like Itadori and Nanami, right? And Kaido. Like mono green is looking very good, okay? And that's something you should definitely lean into, all right? Especially for story, if you are kind of hurting on that. I think that especially now, and this is more something that I'm saying for the future, try to like start thinking in mind like which units are you gonna use for mono teams in the future, considering the units coming out soon and later on, right? Obviously, and that's something you can do by checking out my videos and seeing which units are coming out in the future, right? That's just something I wanted to kind of throw in there. Now, also just an extra one, I'm gonna just put this in, but I'm gonna probably title it 5 tips. I don't know, but you want to put your supports in the front. Okay, now why do you want to put your supports in the front? This was a question I think I've been asked the most, and you know, the reason is, right, because if you put your supports in the front, they're going to be the ones attacking first. Now you might be like, but they're always going to support. Well, no, they're not, because Yaga has a attack debuff on his skill 3 and ult is going to debuff a lot. So when they're attacking, if you're in the back, you're going to be attacking last, right? Gojo always attacks last in this order, right? But if like you just let Gojo go in the front, he's going to attack first, or if he buffs, then for the buff, it doesn't really matter. For buffs, it doesn't matter. But when it's an attack, nah, you don't want to let that go. You don't want to let that go. You want these guys to go first. Always these guys to go first, especially because it's usually when they're attacking, going to be debuffs. So when it's going to be debuffs, you want to make sure that the supports are in the front to put the debuffs so that afterwards the DPS could go crazy, which is why you put the DPSs in the back. So let's say your third slot is a DPS but also has debuffs. Or let's say you have one DPS and one DPS that also debuffs. You always put the DPS that debuffs in the third slot and the one that doesn't debuff in the final slot. You want to make sure that the person in the final slot is the one that has no debuffs, no support, no stuff like that. You want to make it so that it is maximum output of actual damage, and to do that, you got to make it like so. Okay, you got to put supports first, and then afterwards you're going to be able to put your DPS, right? So these are the main tips that I would go with, right? Just some combat tips essentially, and these should help you, right? If you know them all, that's great, good for you, congrats. If you don't, then I'm happy this helped you. I hope this I'm saying the same thing again. What the hell am I saying? I'm losing it. It's 11 p.m. I've recorded too much today, so I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a good night, good morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.